I am presenting Paul's first missionary journey. The map shown here guides you along their path and pinpoints each of the stops they made. The three men going on this journey were Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark. Paul, formerly called Saul, was a recent Christian convert after he had a vision of God. His companion Barnabas was one of the earliest disciples of Jerusalem. Barnabas had also requested for his cousin John Mark to join them. This journey began after the church had been firmly established at Antioch in Syria, and it was time to spread the gospel. They traveled first to Salamis on Cyprus and preached to the Jews in their synagogue. The three missionaries then traveled across the island to Paphos, where they met with the governor who wished to hear the gospel. The governor's prophet feared for his job, so he attempted to stop Paul. He responds by saying, "You, son of the devil, you enemy of righteousness, full of all deceit and villainy, will you not stop making crooked paths of the Lord? And now listen, the hand of the Lord is against you, and you will be blind for a while, unable to see the sun." The three men then left towards the coast of Asia Minor. They made port in Adia and walked the rest of the way to Perga. John Mark then decided to leave and go home to Jerusalem, a decision that made Paul resent him. The remaining two men did not preach in Perga because it is believed that Paul was sick with malaria. Instead, they traveled on to Phrygia. Paul and Barnabas traveled for 7 days to get to Antioch in Pisidian, possibly on recommendation from Sergius Paulus, as archaeology shows traces of his family there. They first took their message to the Jews, and on the Sabbath, Paul shared the whole story of Israel, Exodus, all the way to John the Baptist and Jesus. When Paul described Jesus' life, crucifixion, and resurrection, many of the Jews were greatly affected. Paul was invited to speak at the next Sabbath, when he was met with many opposers. Paul and Barnabas both said to the audience, "For the Lord commands us, saying, I have set you to be the light for the Gentiles, so that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth." The Gentiles were overwhelmed and formed a congregation, but many Jews responded with hostility because they did not like the idea of Gentiles in the church as equals. Paul and Barnabas were expelled from the city, and they headed towards Iconium. Immediately after arriving in Iconium, the two were invited to speak in the synagogue, where they were able to convert many Jews and Gentiles. They spent a great deal of time in Iconium preaching until they got word of an anti-Christian party planning to stone them. Paul and Barnabas escaped the threat and arrived in Lystra, where Paul healed a man who had been unable to walk from birth. The witnesses believed them to be gods, and they were unable to control the crowd. The men were prepared to sacrifice, and Paul was stoned and carried from the town. Paul later awoke and walked back into the city, where him and Barnabas then left for Derbe. Once in Derbe, Paul and Barnabas must have decided to return home. They then traced back their entire journey, stopping in each city and appointing elders for the churches they had started. After 2 years of spreading the gospel, Paul and Barnabas returned home. Soon after returning home, Paul discovered that many of the churches he had founded were being challenged by other groups. So Paul wrote the letter to the Galatians, expressing his anger that they were not honoring the new covenant. He said, "For neither circumcision nor uncircumcision is anything, but a new creation is everything. As for those who will follow this rule, peace be among them and mercy, and upon the Israel of God." Thank you for listening to Paul's first missionary journey.